Okay, and if I might introduce our first panel. Okay? On our first panel, we will hear representatives from two permanent supportive housing providers here in Edmonton. So permanent supportive housing falls at the more intensive end of the housing spectrum, providing wraparound support and care to people who are usually heavy users of service and who do better with higher supports. Okay, so first, Truman McDonald is the Director of Housing at Iris Court, a permanent supportive housing facility in the Bonnie Doon community that provides home to formerly homeless people who have schizophrenia. And Carola Cunningham is the CEO of Niganan Developments, an Indigenous provider that oversees Ambrose Place, providing home to 42 formerly homeless people battling addictions, disabilities, and mental health conditions. So Ambrose Place provides mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual care from an Indigenous perspective. So if you would come forward.
I am the interviewer.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us. It's very kind of you to give some of your evening to us. I'm Clara Bastian. I sit on the steering committee for this project. So we have a bunch of questions, and the first one is, what is your perspective on how we can both understand and respond to Nimbyism in the local community? Maybe we'll start with you, Carola.
I think it's only natural for people to object or become defensive when we're talking about bringing something like a permanent supportive home initiative into their area. And fear is the driving factor. Fear of the unknown, fear of the people that are going to come and live there, fear of mental health, fear of addictions, fear of color, fear of culture. So all those things have to be addressed to reduce that fear. So what was the question?
So how do you address that?
You take one at a time and address each one and reduce that fear. The more people have an opportunity to slip my moccasins on, the better understanding they're going to have of the people that I serve.
Hi. Yes, that's a very good question. How do you overcome the fear? I think transparency is very big as well. As a service provider, you want to inform the community of who your clientele are. For us at Iris Court and the Schizophrenia Society, the Schizophrenia Society is going to open up a facility, and people with schizophrenia is going to be living there. That was, fear, right? So for us, we really had to take a step back and say, okay, let's provide the community with as much information as we can about the illness, what our goal, what our purpose is for this project before we even open the doors. Okay, so the building was there. We were like, we're not going to purchase this building until we do a consultation with the community. We need to educate the community first. So that's what we did. Okay. We sent the community a mail out. We provided information about who we are, what our plan is, and invited them to come to a community presentation and bring your questions to this presentation because we were going to have some answers. Okay, and we had a panel of psychiatrists, we had AHS representatives, we had the board of directors from the organization. But I think the most impact we had at that presentation was someone on our panel that stood up and said, "Hi, I live with schizophrenia, and this is what it looks like for me. And this is why this housing project is important." Okay? And I think when you address those fears you know, and having, you know, a knowledgeable person say, this is what schizophrenia actually looks like. You know, there is no risk of this, there's no risk of that, etc., and breaking down the stigma attached to that illness, right, by a trained professional and clinical staff right there. I think it really helped the community to overcome that fear, and that was a big step for us.
So you both talked. Can everybody hear?
Yes.
Do we need this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and I'll talk about too.
Claire, I'm sorry, I can't really hear.
Yeah, let's see.
Fine, we'll look for the group at the back. So you both talked about fear kind of being the root for the resistance, and you talked about sharing information, and you talked about people walking in your moccasins. But how did you determine who to invite, I guess? Like, how did you define the community? And how do you get someone to walk in your moccasins?
Well, that's a good question. That's a really good question, Claire. The first part was what?
So how do you determine who to invite? Like, how do you define the community? I guess that is important.
Yeah, right. So I wasn't in at the very front of the community engagement, but my understanding is they did all the things that my friend here talked about, and then they also did community consultation with the Community League. And yeah, I think what really happened in our situation, because we did have to deal with Nimbyism, and it was right in our face. I think because we are an Indigenous-led and Indigenous-governed facility, we also carry that stigma of racial profiling. And so people carry unconscious bias in their head. Every one of us do. And every time we see a person's face, we make a biased decision. And so how do you make people recognize that they carry those bias? And how do you change their opinion of you? And so we really, we ended up having to go to court. We were sued. It cost a lot of money. And Cam came to our rescue, and we won our court case, and Right at Home stepped in and helped us finish our building and get that building open. And there was still lots of stigma about it, like the community and even maybe some of our funders were waiting for us to fail. But I just methodically went about being a good neighbor. And so how do you be a good neighbor? You invite people over for tea and conversation. You keep your yard clean. And we kept our whole block clean. We went, every morning we go and pick up all of the needles that are left on the street, and they're not by our residents. We pick up broken bottles, we even pick up people and phone 211 and get them sent home. We don't leave our people out. If we know someone hasn't gotten home by a certain time that they should be home, we go and look for them. We bring them home, and we don't have people lollygagging and laying drunk in front of our front porch. We're not a drop-in center. People live there that have addictions and mental health, but they live very well. They don't bother the people on the street. When they want to yell at somebody, they come home and yell at us because it's safe to do that. So we took on 6 of the heavy users of service. So these are people that the police interface with daily, sometimes up to 17 times a day. And they're panhandling, and they're riding the rails, and they're intoxicated in a public place, and considered very problematic. So once we house them, all 6 of them have graduated from that program, because they come home and they eat lunch, they come home and they have supper, and usually what ends up happening by 8 o'clock, everybody's in bed. So just modeling miopimatsu, a good life, that changes people's opinion. And so, since we've been open, we've had a circle with some of the people that didn't want us in the community, and I call it a reconciliation restorative circle that we had. And people came from the community and apologized for the way they attacked Niganan and what it was trying to do. And so that's a good step. And I think what we've done in the community and how we handled it is it's a powerful story for other people to borrow, to use, that things aren't as bad as you think they're going to be. That you may even, as a good neighbor, decide that you want to come and be part of those people's lives and donate some of your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, how do I follow with that? So I think the original question is like, who do you invite to the conversation?
Yeah.
Right? So for us, we really approached of course, the local community league, but we also looked at local stakeholders like business owners, other organizations within the neighborhood, and had like some discussions with them prior to having our general public invite. So we kind of got those kind of, what are you guys feeling about this? What do you think the response would be from the neighborhood? Because these are business owners, these are stakeholders that have a presence in the community. So how can you help us, right? What is your feedback first, right? But we also developed a good neighbor agreement. So it was a written plan. It was a plan where we outlined our goals, our statement of purpose. We even identified our clientele and some of the criteria we have for our tenants. Spoke about house rules, but another component with that good neighbor agreement was actually how are we as an organization going to respond to complaints or any concerns that they come up anytime, right? So that was all written and presented to the community as well. So it's interesting, Iris Court, we're always trying to maintain that relationship with the community. And a few years ago, Iris Court actually participated in Bonnie Fest. It's a local community festival, so we put up a tent. And a lot of people came and said, "Oh, you're Iris Court. I know all about you," because everyone knew all about us because of this good neighbor agreement and the conversations we had. So it was a really good experience. So it's about ongoing relationships as well. We know our neighbors very well. La Cité Francophone is right across the street. They're a good partner as well. So just getting to know everybody.
So you both talked about being a good neighbor, modeling good neighbor behavior, writing it down. Yeah.
No weeds.
I'm going to jump to the questions from the audience in a second. But I'm just curious, how do you maintain those relationships? So you got in, everybody's good, it's built, we're all super happy about it, but do you have to do things to maintain? You talked about inviting people in for tea. Is that like a continuous thing? Annually. Same with Iris Court?
We've made some really good relationships and partnerships over the year. Like the local pharmacy is there every day. There's a volunteer chamber music orchestra that performs at La Cité Francophone. They come over every Christmas to perform for us. It's the largest turnout they get. Usually they have 5 or 6 people performing at their events, but when it's a Christmas concert at Iris Court, they have 12 to 14 members sign up for it. So it's like, wow. No, it's just for our tenants and our family. So, but this group just comes every year. It's like, yes, when do you want us? It's like anytime you want. Well, right? So it's good. We do have. The building itself used to be the former home for the Sisters of Assumption, and we still have one of the sisters that come and volunteers with us still. So she's seen that whole process, and she's been a real resource to us as well to bridge that community. So it's because she's been there forever, right, in the neighborhood, so she knows the neighborhood well, so she's a real resource to us as well. Yeah. And parking.
Parking. What about parking?
Yeah, we have great parking,
Yeah, so do we.
and we encourage our neighbors to come and rent a stall for a very minimal fee.
That's good.
I just tweeted that.
But we also have a lot of community groups come in, like we have a women's sharing circle every Thursday, we have a men's sharing circle every Tuesday, we have a local drumming group that comes in, and so it really bridges our residents to the larger community, and that community goes out to their community and they become ambassadors for us. We also encourage people to rent our boardroom or to take advantage of our catering, and that gets the word out there, and people come and visit, like, oh man,
That's
so many tours, like I think more tours than there are days in a year I've had, and yeah, it's just getting out there and being a good neighbor. That's really so very important. Like, they come when I'm planting the flowers in the summertime. So one of the women that was dead set against it actually came over that one Sunday afternoon, and she said, wow, I never would have thought that this would be the way it is. And I'm sorry, and you guys are doing an amazing job. So that just helped cement it for me, that what we were doing and how we extended our invitation to anybody to come in at any time. And even when some people will call us and say, you know, one of your tenants is over there causing trouble, we'll go over, and it's usually not our tenant. It might be somebody from another social housing, but we break it up and get them to go home anyway, so, yeah.
Actually, just add some more comments about community coming into the facility. During our consultation period, they said that was a concern of theirs, actually, because the building itself did have a community room at one time that the sisters rented out, but the feedback we got was, oh, it takes up parking on the street, etc., etc. So the feedback that we got was like, don't use that community room. Yeah, so we don't use it. But a lot of people come in and say, like, yeah, we used to have classes down here. It's like, interesting. But at that time, it's like, no, they didn't want us to use it. It's like, okay, interesting. That's a little different reflection.
Yeah.
Because it's based on what you hear in the community, right? So
Great, so you're listening and acting on that input, you're being good neighbors, you're demonstrating it, you're formalizing that agreement in a good neighbor agreement. I also heard you say that you started small with an informal group, kind of to gather intelligence.
Very
and
select
then
group in the community.
moved out from there.
Moved out from there, yeah.
Do you know if they did that in Ambrose Place? They did the same thing in Ambrose Place. So I'm going to ask a few of these. The first one is, what would it take for a community to want permanent affordable housing? I can tell you in Riverdale they wanted it. Well, maybe not permanent support, but I'm just going to keep going through while you think about that. Affordable housing is more acceptable, though sometimes communities fuck. Okay, I can't read that one.
Flip.
Does anybody know what that is?
Flip.
In consultation process.
Okay, affordable housing is more acceptable.
Than permanent of the housing of the previous question.
Okay, sometimes communities flip. How do you tap into people's negativity as facilitators? Do you want to explain that a little bit for us?
That was my question.
Okay.
I was just how in consultation for permanent supportive housing, I have experienced Nimbyism. How can you use that as part of your consultation and take control? Have you been able to take control of that in your consultation and use it to your benefit? And what did that look like? If you were able to. I haven't been able to, so.
Do either of you have that?
I think the biggest thing with people when they come and make a scene is that they want to be heard. And so I give them ample opportunity to be heard, and then I acknowledge that I've heard them, and I paraphrase back to them what they said, and then I begin to tackle their issues one by one. And so it is an issue for people accepting Indigenous people in the neighborhood. And so how I deal with that is I talk about our people and what they're really about and what the journey has been for the first people of this land with Canadians. And I talk about the tripartite that Canada had in our reserves, that Africa used on the people there. And I simply tell the story. I'm a residential school survivor. I can speak to that and say how that happened. And I try to have people understand that the people that we're working with are full of trauma. Like one of the fellows that lives at our place did a blog for End Poverty. And so when he was writing it and I was trying to rewrite it so that it could go in the paper, he told me that he had experienced on the street 7 murders. Well, personally, if I had have experienced 1 murder, I'd be a basket case. So what I'm saying by that is that people really need to understand that these people are hurt, they're wounded, and they need a place. They have an inherent right to be housed in this community. And so I try to appeal to their hearts and to get them to understand that when we share in a loving way, a safe, supportive environment, the outcome is totally different.
That's a big question as well. These are all big questions tonight. I think in our experience, again, the schizophrenia part of it, right? It's not in our neighborhood, and what's that going to do to our property values? That was a big one. For us, we were able to actually give an answer. We have a building in Red Deer as well that's been operating for over 10 years, and we were able to provide evidence that our facility in Red Deer that's been operating for 12 years now had no impact on the property values in that neighborhood. So we're the same operator, we were successful there, and this is what we're doing here. So ultimately, it's not going to impact your property value, right? Because we have that evidence to support our claim that it's not. So that was helpful for us on that point, because I'm sure everyone faces that one.
Sorry, hogging the mic. That's a really good point, and I think now that I have 5 years under my belt with Ambrose Place, I can actually say to the community and to the regular taxpayers, we're saving you so much money.
I think that's one of the questions.
Yes.
Just in addictions and mental health, so that was just a one-liner. I saved over $4 million in 2 years. That's just one line. We're not talking about hospital use, service, like emergency service vehicles going out, police interfacing with them. Like, if you added it all up, which I am doing, we are saving so much money.
At Iris Court, very similar. It's about $417 a day to house somebody in permanent supportive housing. In hospital, you're looking at $1,700, $2,200. That never has gone up. So there's definitely a financial impact.
So I think what I heard you say is talk to their heart and their head. Because different things are going to motivate different people to get past there. Right. So know your community, know what the information and the stories that they need to hear.
Statistical data or is there a story?
So here's another question. How am I doing for time?
Well, we could take a couple from the floor yet.
Okay. Can I just ask this one? And
Sure.
It's the hard one, it's the hardest one.
how do you address people who feel they have a right to choose who lives in their neighborhood? That's it.
Cam will answer this one. He has a really good answer, I think.
Did you want to answer?
Yeah, he does.
Trying to turn my phone off.
Answer your question.
Answer your question.
Or he'll be up and he'll get his
Okay. Then, did we want to take a few questions from the floor? Did anybody have anybody from the floor have a question that they would like answered before we move on to the next part? I can't see your name tag. Jim.
When you're talking about your particular building, and does it not feel, is it difficult for you to have to explain to your community the needs, the medical needs, the people that you serve and so on? Do you not feel that it's kind of crossing a bit of a FOIP line there? That you're saying to an entire community of, these are the people that we serve and this is how we're helping them, which of course is very noble. But ultimately, part of me, I know how important that engagement is, but part of me feels very strongly that how do they get to know that? And why is that fair? Because these people have a right to privacy. And it just, that part, as I'm standing in front of communities and talking to people, it's hard for me to get over that. It's in the back of my mind, you're saying all the right things, but part of me just wants to say it's none of your business. Right? So, how do you get over that? That's very hard.
So part of the Schizophrenia Society of Alberta's programming is community education. So we saw that as an opportunity to educate people on schizophrenia as well. Okay, and we're advocating on behalf of people that, are living with schizophrenia. I'm happy to say that our tenants do work, right? So for us, that was just natural for us to talk about it because that's what we do. There's a whole, there's branches across Alberta talking about schizophrenia and trying to break down the stigma attached to it, right? So for us, that was just natural. Does that answer your question? That's the whole part of our program is advocacy as well. So it's like, we're not going to hide it away. We're going to talk about it and get it out there and explain to people that it's a mental disorder, right?
Thank you.
Well, FOIP, you're not giving their names or their tombstone data. You're talking basically about some of the trauma or disease.
Yeah, so we're just providing information about that. And it's, the individual that did speak there, that's what she wants to do. She wants to share her story. She wrote about it several times. She's been published about her illness. And again, it's all about advocating and informing people that this illness is not scary as the media has portrayed it.
And that's a good point. You have people that want to share their stories.
Yeah.
And a final
We have
question.
one right over here, Claire.
So I actually have heard about your good neighbor agreement as well. My understanding was that it was quite detailed, which really helped to put the neighborhood's fears at ease.
Yeah.
And my question would be, do you find it's really challenging to do that much detail in a good neighbor agreement, or was it relatively easy and the value was there?
It's not, I don't find it overly detailed. It's point form. So our tenants are, history of violence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's our clientele between the ages of, 18 and 55. No, it's not a brief description of the clientele, and also indicating there's house rules that are developed where they can't smoke out in front of the building, right? Yeah. But also, it also clarifies our goals, our purpose, but also identifies the complaints process. So if you had a complaint or a concern that you'd like to bring forward, this is how it's going to be handled. So call this number, first response, we'll make sure we can try fix it on the spot. If not, it goes to the executive director. If not, it goes to the board of directors. So there's a whole channel. It's about 4 pages long.
And have you found, that that's been valuable, like the contact you have established that relationship with the community, like they felt able to kind of...
Yeah, because they see everything. They see is like, okay, so there's no violent offenders, there's clinical sports in reach, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all there. So it kind of removes that fear because like, oh, okay, well, they're promising this and this and this. Because it even explains like we have a 3-strike rule. So if someone breaks a rule, we'll give them an opportunity to change. But if it continues to break, then we look at eviction. And that's actually identified right in the Good Neighbor Agreement as well. And our tenants coming into the program is also aware of our relationship with the community. They know about the Good Neighbor Agreement as well. And guess what? They like that. That makes them feel safe in their home, that I have a whole neighborhood community supporting me and want me here. So that's even a warmer feeling that our tenants have because we've done that process.
Awesome, thank you.
I think thank you again. I don't have a gift.
It's happy to stand us.
Our second panel, we are looking at the intersection where consultation takes place between a housing provider or developer and the local community. So we've got some good voices to speak to that. So let me introduce. So we have Cam McDonald, who is the Executive Director of Right at Home Housing Society, an affordable housing provider, to share some of their approach in talking to the community. Fraser Porter currently serves as President of the Board of the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues, serving from her community league in North Glenora. And then Sherry Shorten, who joins us as a voice who helps steer her community's path through a very difficult consultation process in the Holyrood community. So there is our panel.
I think it's us, yeah. Thank you as well for choosing to be here tonight with us and sharing your expertise. So I'm just going to read in to the questions, no particular order, and I'm already seeing one of the first questions here on this sheet. Good one maybe to start us off with, I think. So how do we get a consistent message from politicians?
Eli,
Yeah.
give them the first question and give them each a few minutes to talk about.
Oh, yes, right. If you wouldn't mind giving, I guess, a little context as well, your organization and interest in speaking your name.
What do you think?
So Cam and I, went through consultation as a resident, Cam as hoping to be service provider in North Glenora for the Right at Home project there. That's been an unabashed success. Independent of that, I have witnessed good and bad consultation with the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues, and continued to advocate, from a professional perspective. I don't think my personal and professional lives can be separated. I do believe in affordable housing for all people in all neighborhoods in Edmonton. And I will stand by that forever. How that meshes with a political message, I guess we'll get to later.
Yeah, I'm Cam, and sometimes, and I'm generally trying to present myself as being modest, but sometimes people say to me, Cam, you're one of these experts in community consultation, and no, I'm not. It is a learning process every time you start to meet with people. Every context is different. Every project is unique. And you can use previous experiences and previous instances and examples that can really help communicate with community stakeholders. But I continue to find it to be very challenging in a positive way to engage with the unique circumstances that are going on in any given community. And like Fraser, I've seen some really good consultations, some good processes, and some that have really gone sideways or have ended up being really negative. But I think what's really important is to be open and accepting and being able to create a forum where people can engage honestly and follow it through to the end. And that's all I'll say on this for right now. I'm sure there'll be lots more to say, so I'll pass it over.
Hello, I'm Sherry Shorten, and I worked in Holyrood over a series of probably a year, working with the community when development came to that community. During that process, we were the NIMBYs. The developer came out and had a concept. So that community started really as a group of citizens, and I stepped up to lead that group at that time because I really felt that with the size of the development that was imposed in our neighborhood by this developer, that we as a community needed to speak up and let the developer know what we thought were good ideas to make the project a better project. It was a very long and difficult process. There was a tremendous amount of work put in by the community, and at the end of it we were called NIMBYs. So I come from that perspective in this conversation. I'm also an architect, so it is my belief that the community's input is just the absolute utmost important piece of the puzzle of creating development that works for communities, and we have to think about what we're doing in a community, not just one site. So that's where I advocate for community voice, I guess. And I don't think that's being NIMBYs, but we were called NIMBYs.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a couple of comments at the end. Because the question is, what do you do to overcome fear or resistance as they come to you, right? And in the context of North Glenora, which was unique, was the opportunity for local people to sponsor a family who ended up in that housing project. And so that community was bought into that housing project from the very beginning. And it wasn't about a housing project, it wasn't about what kind of housing project it is, it was about it being a home and a place to raise your family and to flee from conflict in another world, in another country on the other side of the world. So I think it really hit home to people when it was personal, and when they could see the people that were being benefited by this project, but also that they're just another family wanting to call Edmonton their home. Yeah.
Did either of you want to give also the context of that overall question of overcoming that Nimbyism piece?
Sorry, what's that?
Of overcoming, I guess the question is the overcoming Nimbyism in your own experiences for the, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So in working in Holyrood with community, there were so many people who offered so much to the whole effort of what we were doing. There was people who came out, they said they worked for the city of Edmonton and they had worked in the transportation department. One of the biggest issues, of course, with development is parking and transportation. So we really valued and respected each other in our community for what we could contribute and what then we could contribute to the developer that made a difference in the bigger picture. So being called the NIMBY, it hurt at first, but we got over it.
I think one of the things that was really important in the North Glenora context was, again, I think it was really being open on both sides to have people working together. And I think what really surprised me and I learned a lot about was how much community members are willing to give in a positive way. So it's not a question of getting together to set up a legal fund to try and fight something. Not that at all. It was people getting together to work together to create a vision and a shared understanding of what would work in a community context. So it's very important what has been said here already. And just a bit more experience or reference to that is, you know, we had a vision of what we wanted to do on that site, but we also knew that that probably wouldn't be the final one, but we opened it up early and said, what do you think of this? So we sent out a survey into the community and had the community at large respond to what they would like to see on the site. And from that, a quick example of that is we learned early on is that you don't want to just, we had proposed originally maybe one large structure on this parcel of land. But not really knowing how people felt about it, they said, well, no, we really like having the presence of a church on this community corner. It's been there for 50 years. Can you somehow recreate that and keep that as part of the overall appearance and feel of that whole parcel of land? And so we went back and we looked at that, and yes, we could do that. And that would add to our expenses, but you work around that. As a non-for-profit, you can do some extra fundraising if you have to spend an extra $200,000 on another foundation, for example, this sort of thing. But you can make it work, and so you can come back and say, okay, yeah, we will be willing to do that, and that's what we did. We separated the housing units, and then we created a new community hub and worship area and a daycare that's separate and stands alone. The other thing too is quite often if people are basically being really negative or something like that, that didn't happen a lot at all, or even at all really in North Glenora, but going from some other experiences, how to deal with that. Like if they're going to say it's going to bring down your property values or it's going to increase crime, there's lots of studies and facts around that you can reply back to, and sometimes that will alleviate some of the fears, but not always, because again, every community is unique and every project's unique. But what I also found really interesting was that people have real legitimate concerns, right? And so sometimes we start, we have this thing, oh, everyone fights about parking. And so inevitably someone's gonna put up their hand and say, well, what about the parking? But in the case of North Glenora in particular, the parking and the traffic was a real concern because of the way the intersection and the roadways were constructed in that area. It had this crazy 3.5-way stop. You'd have to see it to believe it. You drive, you stop, you go, you stop. And so we offered to do a traffic study, and it was also coinciding with a widening of the sidewalks. There was some infrastructure going on that the city had been doing. And so, you know, people were there with their children saying, you know, you're adding 16 new townhomes, another 100 people on the site. There's going to be 30 cars. How are you going to control this intersection? How is it going to impact this intersection? And we had to go and get a traffic impact study and a parking study. But that was something I think that the community wanted answers to, and it was a legitimate concern. It could have been very easy for us to argue and say, well, we're not spending $5,000 on that, and it's just a baby project. They didn't do a traffic impact study on Kingsway Garden Mall LRT crossing, so why do you know, that's not going to, you know, that's not going to create a lot of goodwill with the community stakeholders, you know, because they're thinking, well, what happens if our child gets mowed down by a car, and And interestingly enough, just a little aside, you can't predict human behavior and think there's always unknowns, but I mean, the first month that the building was open, a young child from one of the housing units ran out onto the street and did get hit, actually, unfortunately. Very quick lesson on going to the corner and to the sidewalk. Fortunately, the young child wasn't injured, but it's so easy to want to run across the street to the school, right? So those concerns from the community were really legitimate ones, right? Even though it was a quote unquote not a very busy street. So those are the nuance that you have to pay attention to. You know, we were doing another, I hate to be hogging the microphone here, I'll pass it in just a second, but just while I'm thinking of it, because it's kind of related, you know, hearing what people are on people's minds, and, well, no, I'll stop right there. I'll let someone else speak.
Context. The piece I appreciate those is almost what you're saying is how do you start creating a vision, and then from there, when you start that engagement, being flexible with what the overall outcome is going to look like, and then in the same sense, justifying what are some of those true concerns from fact and fiction almost. Which I think kind of plays into a couple of those other questions, and I don't know if we'll touch on them as well around, I think we've touched on that property value piece as well as what's the crime rate that kind of goes up, which is two other questions, but maybe just to loop back, and if anyone wants to give maybe a little more context on this question, the question just to, before I jumped in too quickly, was how do we get a consistent message from politicians?
I can offer the context there. As a housing provider, I'm around politicians quite a bit, and they're always very strong with us. Our neighborhoods need to do more, and we're going to step up the plate, and my ward really wants it. But yet, when you get out there and you're in the community, the tone shifts, and it becomes very conciliatory, and we'll look at it, and it's not quite as strong and as dedicated, and it's very frustrating when you're a housing provider and you know the shortfalls that are there, and the work that you have to do is important. And we look at it, that housing is a human right, and it's very frustrating. So how do you get that consistent message from a politician that doesn't change from group to group? It's a tough question.
I have an answer. I feel pretty strongly that you need to start the process with the community engaged. So when you are going to your counselors, you're there. I mean, I'll speak to the issue of Holyrood. It was pretty clear to us when we got into the process that the city and the politicians had made a deal. Okay? So then the politicians came out and were conciliatory to us. So I've been advocating for the city to bring the community in at day one. So when you're there, going to your politician to explain your project and your vision and the excitement of that great project, why isn't the community there at the table, that same meeting?
That's a good point.
Yeah, I might add to that I think that as, you know, politicians, you're beholden to stakeholders from all levels of society, government, nonprofit, and the corporate sector. And unstable political response to a housing development represents an uncertain future for that housing development. And I think that the political response simply mirrors the acceptance in your citizenry. And so you're not going to get a consistent political message unless your citizens are fully on board. And then the politicians will reflect that message back to you. So I don't think it's about convincing politicians. They're super eager to hand out our money. It's about, right? They're eager to be there and to facilitate that funding in a context where it will work. It's about getting community buy-in and local investment. I think that the way politicians get excited is if they see local citizens investing in these projects, investing time, investing resources, and investing emotional labor into seeing that project succeed. And then you get politicians lining up at that ribbon cutting, right, Cal? Yeah.
Yes, I think that exactly what Fraser has said there is if people are involved and excited about it, the politicians will come forward and support it. I think in the North Glenora context there, we often heard Scott McKean championing the project, and he didn't really champion Right at Home so much. He was championing the community and the communities and the neighbors and the neighborhood, and that, I think it gets back to this whole thing about we're starting now as a community, as a city, to have more and more positive histories in terms of development and process. And we have, and remember saying that each community is unique, but we can look at the success stories that have happened. So we can look at Kenora Place as a permanent supportive housing development that now has an enduring track record. The Schizophrenia Society's Iris Court, Ambrose Place. These are now what were very contentious projects, have now proven over time that they haven't had a negative impact in the community. And so we can draw on that when people are still really apprehensive. We can say, oh, the crime rates don't go down according to this study. But then you can also say, but in the Edmonton context, here are 3 great examples of how this is not going to negatively impact the community. And I think it's emboldened on the housing providers to really do the best they can to ensure that the housing developments they're building and then they're operating really have that lasting positive impact in the community. So, with the North Glenora housing development, there's so much at stake. We wear it every day because it's so important that we can say 5 years from now, the community in a way took a risk and supported us, and look what happened. So I think over time, if we can continue this collective effort, we'll have all of these situations, all of these histories, and we can draw on them and show them to people. And that will help alleviate a lot of the fear and apprehension that will continue as we go forward to build. Permanent supportive housing is definitely more contentious in communities than a mixed income, market-based affordable housing development.
So it's almost twofold. It's that mobilizing community and then drawing on good examples that can help advocate for the cause. And just for my 2 cents, one of my favorite quotes is a community, government is as accountable as a community is as organized. And I think that kind of speaks to this piece. So, yeah. So Cameron, I think this next question was partially pushed towards you in the last panel, but just correct me if I'm wrong if this was the one. Why do communities get to handpick their neighbors? Was that the one that was transferred? Yeah. And you got a good response for that?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up a little bit because it's usually tied to screening. And I was at a community consultation a few weeks ago, and you really have to be mindful of things sometimes. But we were asked by 4 different stakeholders, how do you screen your tenants? Who are they? How are you going to make sure that our community remains safe? Are you only going to have people that are employed? That was actually one in particular that did come up. And really, it's really not the right thing to say in that context about, do you have the right to pick your own neighbors? Because at my house, I can't come and pick who's living next door to me. It's all a function of natural neighborhood evolution. So why should the community pick the tenants that are going to be going into that housing development. And you know,
Ken's question.
yeah, well, yeah. And so when you're asked 3 times, you know, how do you screen? How do you screen? Who are they? Who are they? And the zoning bylaw is very clear. It's not about who's living. It's about use, housing. It's about land use. And then I very flippantly said, after the 3rd time it was asked, I said, this is the last question on screening, right? And the people didn't like what they heard, because one fellow got up and said, you know, this is very important to us about what you're bringing into our neighborhood, so please don't just cut us off at the 3rd time if more people want to ask this question. So I said, of course, you're right. But you can see sometimes how you're, and it's getting back to what Jim was saying, when do you say enough is enough about who people are, right? And when we are now starting to take a rights-based approach to housing finally, as has been, you know, pushed by the UN, and we actually changed our name a few years ago to Right at Home Housing Society. It's kind of a double innuendo, or whatever you say. You know, you have a right, it's a right at home, right, R-I-G-H-T, and you're feeling right at home, which is, you know, a warm connotation. And so how do you, have that community engagement where you're not, in a way, insulting the people that are very concerned? And I get back to trying to be as authentic and sincere as possible when you're talking with people. And sometimes at the end of that conversation, that meeting, a few people came up to me and said, you know, you just need a couple of talking points on how to answer that. And I said to them, no, that's not going to work. The people will know right away that it's a talking point. No, you have to really sincerely talk through what people are concerned about, and stay late after the meeting and continue talking through what their concerns are, and that sort of thing. And I think, you know, that will help create the trust that really needs to be there when you're wanting to build an affordable housing project in an area that may not have a lot of affordable housing or non-market housing. Anyway, I'll pass it over to.
It's always struck me that we must know about each other, this place that we've all been, but we refuse to admit that we've been there, which is down and out, unemployed, needing a house, right? And needing a safe space. And until we're willing to look at every person among our community, in a whole community, and say, despite that person's foibles, I know they're not perfect, even though I am, they deserve a place to sleep too. They deserve a place to sleep, and even though they're flawed, they're not bad people. They make bad choices, right? So when we get to choose our neighbors, we may look at Fred and Steve down the street and say to ourselves, they're great neighbors, but they make mistakes too. And so I think we need to start talking about real conversations. We need to get honest with each other about how good we are in our own communities and how we can contribute too, because I've got lots of neighbors around me who are givers and doers, and they mean a lot to each other and to our tiny little village. But I've also got some who mow their grass and are kind of dreadful neighbors. And so who's better in that context? Somebody who needs affordable housing, or somebody who hides behind a picket fence and says, I'm doing a great job here? And so we need to start telling, like Cam said, success stories about Ambrose Place and about North Kenora. But furthermore, I think it's a more complex conversation about who we are as human beings. And no, we don't have a right to choose our neighbors. We have a right to love our neighbors. And that's different.